Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Folge von Radikal Glücklich, deinem Podcast für ein strahlendes, richtig gut gelauntes Leben. Hier ist Silja, Folge 130. Achtung, ich sage einen Satz auf Englisch. This is an English podcast. After a short German introduction, you will listen to Tracee Stanley and me talking about the radiance of rest. Also diese Folge ist auf Englisch. Ich habe einen sehr besonderen Gast heute. Ich bin total stolz, dass sie sich für mich Zeit genommen hat, obwohl sie gerade in ihren Sommerferien ist. Tracee Stanley hat ein wunderbares Buch geschrieben. Radiant Rest heißt es. Ist im Moment nur auf Englisch da. Ich hoffe sehr, dass es bald übersetzt wird ins Deutsche. Es ist eine Anleitung zum Pause machen und zwar insbesondere zu Yoga Nidra Pausen. Vielleicht erinnerst du dich an die Yoga Nidra Einheit, die ich aufgenommen habe, bevor ich selber meine kleine Sommerpause hier im Podcast gemacht habe. Und sie erklärt, wie man das macht, solche Einheiten, wie man sich selber anleitet, wie man, auch wenn man sehr beschäftigt ist, solche Pausen macht. Und all das besprechen wir im Podcast. Tracee redet super gut verständliches, langsames Englisch. Also ich möchte dich ermutigen, es zu probieren, diese Folge anzuhören. Ansonsten wirst du nächste Woche wieder was von mir hören. Und bitte, wenn du sagst, boah, Englisch, nee, das ist ja blöd, dann klick mal, in den Shownotes findest du wieder Blogposts zur Folge. Dort habe ich ein paar ihrer Sätze ins Deutsche übersetzt, insbesondere den wunderbaren Householder Flow, den sie mir vorliest im Podcast, den sie uns vorliest und der wunderschön ist. Ich habe auch alles verlinkt, was du zu Tracee wissen musst, alle Seiten und so weiter. Schau dir ihr Buch an. Es ist wirklich ein Kleinod, ein wunderbares. Ich zeige das heute in der Story auch am Freitag, wenn dieser Podcast rauskommt. Die Story ist ja immer nur 24 Stunden da auf Instagram und Facebook und also ich mag's richtig doll sehr. Also Werbung ohne Auftrag, super Buch. Und ich freue mich, dass du hier bist. Danke fürs mit mir Weggehen. Am Samstag lose ich die 3 Hörbücher aus. Und ich habe mich total gefreut über alle, die mir einen Kommentar dagelassen haben, letzte Woche oder im Laufe der Woche. Und die lieben Sachen, die ihr geschrieben habt. Ich hatte nicht die Zeit, euch zu antworten, aber ich habe alles gelesen und es hatte Tränen in den Augen. Also danke dafür. So, und jetzt ohne viel weiter zu quatschen, genießt die wunderbare Tracee Stanley in dieser Folge. Ich habe mich danach so entspannt und so happy gefühlt. Also ich hoffe, es geht dir genauso, wenn du dieses Interview zu Ende angeschaut hast oder angehört hast. Wenn du uns sehen willst, auf YouTube habe ich das Video hochgeladen, wo du uns quatschen siehst. Bis bald. I feel honored and grateful to have this very special guest whose book has accompanied me during the summer. It's Tracee Stanley, and your book, Radiant Rest. I'm so happy that we're going to talk about it because it's such a wonderful piece of work. It's like a little present that you unwrap and it keeps unfolding while reading it. So I love it a lot. And I'm grateful that you make a little break in your sabbatical to chat with me. So if there's anything which you want to say hello to the listeners, which are mostly German, mostly women, mostly in love with resting, but not finding enough rest in their life. So I think we got a perfect topic. Introduce yourself.
Thank you. Well, you gave already a lovely introduction. And I think that one thing that I can add to that is that I feel like part of my dharma here on earth is to really remind people that rest is their birthright and that rest is also a portal into self-remembrance. And I really believe that that's part of why we're all here, is to remember who we truly are.
Yeah, I think so too. And I, in my early days of yoga, so my first question will be how your path started. In my early days of yoga, I misunderstood yoga as a duty and as work, which I had to do to awaken. And so I got a little tense someday. And I would love to hear in your book, you write in your bio that you've been practicing Nidra since 2001, which is a long time, 20 years of practice and teaching. So I would love you to tell us how this started, this journey, and remembering the Dharma.
Yeah, so the journey began on a balcony in South Africa, where I was just sitting, waiting for the sun to rise. It was a very quiet moment. Everyone else in the house was asleep. And I had what I would call now kind of a spontaneous moment of meditation. I had no meditation experience. I didn't know anything about meditation. But what I knew in that moment was that something became so still and so quiet that I touched this kind of pristine place within me, that it was very clear to me that this stillness and this peace and this blissful feeling was coming from inside of me, and that it was something that was always there, that was being revealed, as opposed to something that was happening in the external world. And so I started to kind of go on this journey to figure out what happened. And I, would ask my roommates, and I would talk to people, and people would look at me like I had 12 heads. And eventually I found someone, a friend, who said, "Oh, I know exactly what it is that happened to you. Let me bring you to this bookstore, and I'm going to give you these books to read." And he brought me to a spiritual bookstore, and he handed me 6 or 7 books. And I have always been a voracious reader. And I started reading these books. One of the books that I read was a book by Harsh Johari on Tantra. And there was a chakra meditation in that book that, back in those days, we weren't listening to recordings. So you would have to read the directions for the meditation, and then you'd have to guide yourself through it. And I guided myself through this meditation after reading the instructions in the book. And this experience unfolded of all of these colors and portals and things that I had never experienced before. And so when I came back to the States, I earnestly started looking for meditation classes. And I found myself in a Zen meditation center, but for whatever reason, Zen meditation didn't quite click with me. And then someone told me, "Oh, you should practice yoga. You should think about yoga." And so I went and I did a yoga class, and I fell in love with the yoga because I had an experience that reminded me of the experience on the balcony in the very first class. And I remember that the woman who was sitting in front of me in the class, after the class was over, because at the end, the teacher played like a gong. It was like a gong bath at the end of the class. And she said, "So did you feel it?" I thought, oh, this is happening on purpose. So this means that this teacher is creating an alchemy to allow something to unfold, some kind of experience to happen. I need to know more about this. So I started to practice pretty much 5-6 days a week. But it really wasn't until I read a translation of the Yoga Sutras that I started to understand that yoga was not just physical exercise, and that there was actually a journey and a promise of yoga, which is the promise really of liberation and freedom. And I started to seek out teachers who could lead me to that, because that was not the norm. People were not really talking about that in, Western yoga classes that I was going to, that were a little bit more, tiny bit spiritual, but definitely much more physical, dynamic, asana based. And, I read this sutra 136, Vishoka va Jyotishmanti, which really talks about this place within us that is always radiant, always brilliant. It is untouched by any circumstance or anything that has ever happened to us, environment, condition. It's eternal, was there before we had a name, will be there when we no longer have a body, and that this is something that we all have within us. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that's kind of like what I felt on the balcony, that there was something in me that has always been there that was still and peaceful. Um, and so when I was introduced to the practice of Yoga Nidra in 2001, so this is now about 5 or 6 years after I started practicing dynamic physical asana-based classes, and it wasn't even introduced to me as Yoga Nidra. The teacher at that time just said, oh, lay down and we're going to do a practice. And I thought, well, this is very odd. Why are we laying down? We haven't done any like movement. But the experience that I had in this Yoga Nidra class, or at the time, maybe it was even more deep relaxation, was so deep and profound and so still. And the feeling of that peace and bliss felt like I carried it with me for hours and hours afterwards. And I just wanted to go back and do whatever that thing was called, because I didn't know what it was called at the time. Whatever that thing was called, I want to go back and I want to do that again. And I was lucky that the teacher that I was studying with at the time, his name is Yoga Rupa Rod Stryker, that the way that he taught his classes, and then later when I trained with him, he always taught that you don't just let your students kind of hang out in Shavasana after the asana class is over. You guide them to a place that has the opportunity to be sublime and supreme and blissful. And that practice was the practice of deep relaxation, guided Shavasana, and then in later times really spelled out as Yoga Nidra practice. So for me, when I started to practice this more, and then I started to get brave enough to bring it into some of the classes that I was teaching, what I noticed from the students was immediately like, wait a second, what happened? First of all, what was that? I've never done that before. I feel so peaceful. It's the first time I've rested. I feel like I've slept for 2 hours and that was just 15 minutes. And what I started to understand, because at the time I was working in Hollywood, so I had a very fast-paced kind of career, and everything around me seemed to be about doing and gaining. And that has, the culture in Hollywood is very much like that, that it seemed like the perfect antidote to what was ailing the people that I was working with, that would help me when I was feeling stressed out or overwhelmed. And it just seemed like something that everyone needed. There wasn't a single person that I felt like I knew, either in my work environment or in my social circles, that didn't need deep rest. And it only began to get worse, right, as the cell phones proliferated and the social media and the apps and everything else. And so this feels like such a simple gift to be able to offer. It's not a complicated practice. People who have practiced it once can have deep experiences, as proven by myself and other people that I've taught and other people that I know that practice Yoga Nidra and have students. And the experiences can be very deep, but you don't have to have any experience to receive the great benefit of Yoga Nidra. You don't even have to like yoga. So that's why it is part of my dharma to share. It's like, I feel like when you've been given certain wisdom from your teachers, and then you take those practices and you embody those practices, and then there's more wisdom that evolves, and you begin to evolve and have a different understanding or an expanded understanding of what it is that you've learned, and you know that it's beneficial. I feel like there is, for me, somewhat of a gift, both to give this practice and then also to receive as a teacher in a way. The support of the goddess, the one who is the goddess that is holding us, whether we think about that as the earth, but to be of support. And this is my way of being of support.
That's so beautiful. I will ask you later, after this recording, how we can find the teacher and the sutra. Mm-hmm. So it will be in the show notes. Everybody who wants to dive deeper, I will ask Tracee. I made a note about it. You said in the beginning, and you're also saying in your book, that it is a birthright for us to have deep rest and find that place within ourselves to where there's peace and space and freedom. And I feel like when I look at my own journey, and also when I look at my own habits of how to live and how fast I lose that sense of peace again, is that I think there's a part of us in Western society, maybe especially, maybe not, who feels guilty, which needs to prove something, which has created patterns that make us run to prove or to find our worth in somewhere outside of us. So maybe you want to share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think people are waking up to during the times of the pandemic, especially, because I think that when in the very beginning, when the lockdowns happened and we were kind of cut off from the source of our validation, meaning that we were cut off from the doing, we were cut off, a lot of us, from working, right? And then we really had to sit with ourselves in our space and really look around to see, like, what is this life that I've created? What is this life that has meaning? What is it that's meaningful? And I think that when that happened, what I started to notice is that people realized actually how exhausted they are. It's almost kind of like one of the things where you finally take a vacation after working really, really hard, and then you wind up getting sick on the vacation because you finally have allowed your body to rest, right? And so what I feel like is that what we get to see then when we look around at our life and we look at the meaning of our life and the life we've created in that stillness, really a global sadhana that we were all in at the beginning of the pandemic, that we get to ask again, like, what is it that's really important? How am I spending my time? And I think it became very obvious that our worth is tied up in the external. The advertisers, the app creators, the people who are selling us beauty products, they are constantly pointing the light as though it is outside of us, and that everything we need to attain in order to be happy, to be fulfilled, is out there. And the spiritual teachings in many traditions tell us that the fulfillment is not out there. The truth is not out there. The truth is inside, right? And that doesn't mean that we get to spiritually bypass, right? Because when we are trying to touch into our truth, it means that we also have to look at where we have been lying to ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so it is, I really feel like the culture that in America, it's a lot of times it's referred to as like the grind culture or the toxic culture. And it's the same culture of Hollywood, right? It's like I got a really good eye into that for a very long period of time. It's like if you're not always, you know, chasing after something, if you're not always hustling, if you're not always working 5 hours longer than the next person in the cubicle or in the office, or, you know, if you're not on set for 18 hours and not, and then bragging about only getting 2 hours of sleep, then you're not worthy. And so I think that that's something that is changing, that we're realizing that, you know, they say, I think at the end of, you know, they've asked people on their deathbeds, you know, what their wishes were, and none of them ever wished that they had worked an hour longer or an hour harder. They wish that they had spent more time with their family and their loved ones and enjoying the world of nature, not the world of things, right? Not the world of trying to make themselves more famous, you know? So I think that rest is definitely tied to that, because the thing that you're denied when you're chasing the external is you're denied rest, right? And so the practice of Yoga Nidra just allows us to kind of fall asleep to the world of name and form, and the world of things, and wake up to that part of us that is eternal, that part of us that is always at rest. And that really, truly is just one of the birthrights that I think we have when we come into this world.
Yeah. So let's talk about Yoga Nidra and the state one is in while practicing. You talk about the states of our mind and the fourth state in your book. And for listeners who haven't done Yoga Nidra before, you might want to explain a little about the state that this relaxation practice leads us to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's good to just remember that Yoga Nidra, the way that we normally talk about it, is a technique or a process of relaxing systematically. But Yoga Nidra is also considered to be a state of consciousness. And so when we think about the states of consciousness, we know that we have the waking state, we have the dream state, we have the deep sleep state. And usually for most of us, that's what we think about. Oh, those are the states of consciousness. But the teachings would say that there is another state of consciousness that is known as the fourth, or Turiya. And that state of consciousness is said to be a place of what's called nirvikalpa samadhi. And so nirvikalpa is this place of no thought, place of non-doing, and it is a place of unsurpassed peace, bliss, and calm. And so if we think about that, it's like, wait, well, how could I be in this state of consciousness that is no thinking and no doing, yet there's peace and calm there? And so we can kind of think about Turiya as this void that is both fertile and empty. And it is the place that is beyond, right? It's said to even be beyond description, right? We can try to describe it, but it's beyond description. And what Yoga Nidra is really this practice, and it's so much more than what I could even articulate, right? But we try to articulate. But the practice is really this way of systematically relaxing the body to allow you to withdraw your senses inward. Normally, all of our senses are drawn outward, right? We just talked about that. So this process of pratyahara, which is the fifth limb of yoga, to withdraw our senses inward so that we can re-assimilate into our true nature. Yoga Nidra is this process of what's called Laya Yoga, which is the yoga of dissolution. So we dissolve, once again, everything that is not real so that we can move into these other states of consciousness and have different things revealed to us that are normally veiled in the waking consciousness. And we do that by allowing ourselves to weave consciousness through all of the states. So there's a part of us that stays awake and aware through the entire practice as we move through these states of consciousness, where we might even hear ourselves snoring, right? We might even become aware, like, oh, my body is asleep, but there's part of me that is awake and aware. And I stay awake and aware through those transitions between the states of consciousness. And the beauty of what happens when you practice Yoga Nidra more and more, I feel like most yoga practices and meditation practices the effects of them are cumulative, is that whether you reach that fourth state or not, right, isn't really the issue, because nothing is guaranteed. Moving into the state of Yoga Nidra really arrives by grace. It's not really even something we can make happen. And I've known people who've had deep experiences the very first time they ever practiced Yoga Nidra, right? So all we're doing when we practice these techniques are preparing to kind of receive the grace of Yoga Nidra. And so whether or not you go deep in a practice or don't go deep, it's not about that. It's about surrendering the resistance, surrendering the thoughts, allowing the body to rest, and keeping that awareness weaving through. And when you come back into the waking state, what I feel like happens is we become more awake to our lives. We become much more awake to our lives, and so much then is able to be revealed to us. We see the way that we think, the way that we react. Time seems to slow down a little bit. We become more patient. And we remember that there's a part of us that's always at rest. And then I also think that this awareness then weaves through our dream state. Our dreams become more lucid the more we practice Yoga Nidra. There's just so many portals of different kind of awarenesses that open the more that we practice Yoga Nidra.
I could listen to you for hours. I feel like I'm getting more and more relaxed as longer as you talk. So you talk about that we get more awake to our lives. And I feel like the moment we learn to stop the habit of being busy and being outside and learn to rest, that is also the moment we can catch ourselves during a pattern that arises, which you said. But it can also be scary because it might reveal topics or past or present or our being that scare us, and that scarcity was one of the reasons we kept ourselves busy. So what is your advice for people who are maybe in the beginning or in the process of this, of learning all of this, and who get confronted?
Yeah,
confronted with old stories, and fear arises, and maybe trauma. I don't know.
Yeah. The thing is, we all have trauma. And Yoga Nidra is certainly one of these practices where memories can arise and sensations and feelings in the body can be released. So the first thing that I would say is that if you know already that you are suffering from trauma or PTSD, to really seek out a teacher who is trauma informed, right? To make sure that however it is that they are leading you through these practices are as consciously aware of the fact that you have or are suffering from trauma prior to going into a practice. So that's something that if you're seeking out a teacher, you should ask them, are you trauma informed, right? Because a lot of times, even the mere suggestion to someone to relax and let go can be triggering, right? Even the suggestion that the only way to practice yoga nidra is lying on your back with your legs 5 to 6 inches apart and arms out to the sides. And so what we need to do is we need to be able to reclaim the practice for ourselves and advocate for ourselves for what works for us. Because sometimes we might not even know why something feels uncomfortable, right? And so in the book, I do offer different postures that you can practice yoga nidra in, that you don't have to actually even have your eyes closed to practice yoga nidra.
I love that. I love that because I know a lot of people in my classes that need a state in between open and closed eyes.
Exactly. So you can have your eyes halfway open. You can, instead of feeling, the points in the body just with your mind, you can touch the points in your body. There's definitely classes that I've been to in the past where people will say, you have to remain perfectly still. Well, that could also be triggering, right? So the book has different postures that you can use, different suggestions of what you can do. And one of the practices that really has resonated with people, especially since the book came out, because we were in the pandemic when the book came out. We're still in the pandemic now, but we were in mostly lockdown, is that we can create these energetic circles of protection that allow us to have this sense of a sacred abode, right? A place where we can feel protected, right? We can ask for our guides and our ancestors and for benevolent beings to come into the circle of protection. And so people seem to resonate with that practice that's in the book, the energetic circles of protection. And as well, we need to be practical, right? We need to have people on hand who are therapists, especially therapists, psychotherapists that may be trained in yoga nidra, so that they understand the depth of the practice and what can happen in the practice. And so when we do our teacher trainings and workshops, we always have a list of therapists that are trained and certified in yoga nidra and are also licensed psychotherapists, so that if something does arise, that you can be supported.
That's important. I think that's really important. To find the support when something arises, and to be able to cultivate a practice that feels safe, I think are two major steps. And I love the idea of the circles in the book. That was wonderful. You also talk about people whose life is busy. So I want to cover that up too, because I know most of us are busy with lives that include a lot of roles we need to fulfill, like being a mother or making a career or having a house. And so you have a little, it's called as a householder, practice as a householder. And there's a little kind of like a poem, the householder flow, it's called. I love that. And I would love to put it on the blog if I am allowed.
Yes, of course. Of course. It might be helpful for me to read the householder's prayer so people have an idea.
Oh,
and then I can talk about it.
That would be just wonderful.
Okay.
Good.
So the householder's prayer. The altar is in my heart. The sun and the moon are my gurus. I trust the earth to support me. Each time I close my eyes, I enter the void. My heart is a portal to my sacred cave. I whisper the names of the divine as I prepare my meals. I notice the flow of my beloved's breath as they fall asleep, and I synchronize my breath to the flow of love. I place a blessing in the pause between the breaths. I hold the power to create a new reality with every thought. I honor silence as a blessing. I explore who I am and who I am not in the mirror of relationship. I question my beliefs with curiosity and courage. I honor my ancestors. I lay down all self-doubt with compassion and forgiveness. I remember the light of my soul as I enter the dream state. I recall the beauty of truth as I transition from sleep to waking. I know the vibration of truth. I remember that nothing is mundane. I honor the power of the transition as a portal to transformation. Everything is an offering. My life is a sacred ritual.
That is so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to read that and share it.
I really love it because it's, I feel the invitation to embrace the pause, the rest in every moment, and to remember who we are. It's a good idea for everybody. So I copied it. It's on my vision board, actually.
Beautiful. Thank you.
So, and on the other page of the book, there's a relaxation row where people can remember their birthright to rest and can commit themselves to practice and see the intention of practice clear. So I love that too as a step into, because I think we need clear intention. We need to see that there's something in us that is yawning, the right word, that is in need of rest and of what rest can offer. And if we see that clear, if we no longer look for a thing or a prize or next step that life offers us, a bigger house or a bigger career or whatever, if we see that all we wish for might be in us and might be seen when we rest, then we, I think, can learn to live beautifully put in words in the householder's flow.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for recognizing that and reminding me also of that as you reflect back. It's, the householder's flow was something that was really just born of being with so many students. And my teachers really were about making sure that we had these practices, these sadhanas that went on for periods of time, unbroken periods of time. So, it was like, okay, you're going to chant this mantra in your japa meditation for 150,000 repetitions. So yeah, that's going to take you 2 years every day to get that done. And can you try again? And it's just
Siri knows many things.
Oh, can you hear that?
Yeah, I don't know. Is that your Alexa or what?
No, I don't know where that's coming from. hopefully
Spirit talking to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting that what she's saying.
I didn't
And
get it.
and so, I think that it's one of the things that I would notice for myself and also with students when offering suggestions for sadhana. The first thing was, I don't have time. How am I going to fit this in? I don't have time. And yet there was a deep, deep longing to do the practices and to deepen the spiritual life. But that it seemed as though this isn't from me somehow. This isn't from me because I can't sit in the same place at the same time every day consistently for, weeks, because I have a life and I have responsibilities and I'm a householder. And so I wanted to really think about this idea of reframing practice, because I think westernized yoga has kind of commodified this idea that yoga needs to be a certain amount of time to be valid. So that you've got to roll out your mat in your yoga studio and be instructed by someone for, an hour or an hour and a half for your yoga practice to be worthy. So again, looking outward, right, for the worth even of our yoga practice. And instead, to think about this idea of reclaiming yoga as a life's path, that it's not just about your yoga mat being rolled out or being instructed in an hour-long class, but it really is about how you live your life, right? And so if we can just go back, first of all, to the yamas and the niyamas and look at where we need to focus a little bit more on those yamas and niyamas, that in itself is just a yoga practice, right? You could spend the rest of your life just focusing on the yamas and the niyamas, right? And then we think about these other limbs of yoga, right? And how is it that if I can just take 2 minutes and close my eyes at the beginning of my day and just be aware of my breath, and maybe even just be aware of the mantra that I was born with that rides on the breath, this mantra of so hum, and just spend 2 minutes just hearing so on the inhale and hum on the exhale. That is a valid practice, and that is a deep practice that can also lead you to self-realization. So if we can weave these little moments of 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes throughout our day of practice, if we can decide that our cooking of a meal or the serving of a meal is going to be part of our practice and how we bring attention and awareness to what we're doing in every moment, how we maybe even infuse our cooking with mantra or song or love and joy, right? That's a practice.
That's true.
And, yeah. So I just really wanted people to be able to reclaim the practice for themselves and shift the idea that anything is mundane. Everything we touch and everything we see and everything we hear and everything we do has the ability to be sacred if we just bring our awareness to it.
Yes. So I need to know now, is there ever a moment with all your gentle calmness that you are in a rush? Does that occur still? Does that still occur in your life? Being in a rush?
That's good. Yes. It usually has to do with something external, when my awareness goes externally. And I have this mantra that I would say to myself when I would notice this happening a lot. It doesn't happen as much anymore. And the mantra was, as soon as I felt that like movement into fight or flight, I would just pause and I would create a transition. Right. So instead of observing now the transitions between waking, sleeping, dreaming, and the fourth, I would create a transition by pausing. And in that pause, I would just say to myself, I have space, I have time. And that would immediately start to reframe this idea that there's an illusion that we need to rush. And at some point, because that was a very heavy theme, always, like since growing up, it was a theme of rushing, of, I'm going to run out of time. And so I did a spiritual practice called vichara, which is kind of this practice of contemplation or deliberation, where you kind of go backwards in time to discover the root impression or the root samskara of a thought or a pattern. And when I went back and did this practice, what I realized was that there was an event that happened when I was really young, like probably 7 or 8, where there was a girl in my church that everyone loved. She was like the prettiest girl. She was the most, popular girl. And everyone looked up to her of how beautiful and how cute she was. And she was just like a year or 2 older than I was. And I remember that she died in a fire. And I remember hearing my mother on the phone saying, "Oh, it's so sad that she ran out of time. She didn't have any time. She will never grow up." And so and I had forgotten about this until I did this practice of vichara and kind of tracing back to this original samskara, that somehow I created a belief that there wasn't enough time. Because what I saw was this person that I looked up to whose time was cut short. And so I was able to really see how that belief had weaved its way all the way through my life until I did this practice when I was, like decades later, and then able to unravel that. Right. And so that was we could say the sankalpa that I was using to kind of be the antidote to this idea that there wasn't enough time, is that I have time, I have space.
Yeah, that is interesting. Thank you for sharing this story and personal process. When I thought about my need to rush through life and to be busy, like in Germany we call it keine leeren Wege, so not doing an empty way. I don't know how to translate it. So when you go up the stairs, you see if you can take something with you which needs to be upstairs.
Yes, right, right.
Which is kind of
efficiency, kind of.
Efficiency, yeah. And that was it developed into a weird pattern. And of course, whenever you do not and be busy and be active and a little stressed, but not too much, people make you compliments how much you do and all that you manage. And that, of course, feeds the ego and keeps you in the trap. And so I went back with a coach. I did a coaching on it. Why there's such a need to do all that, and I felt that it's not good for me, but I couldn't really step out of it. And there was I grew up with my grandma a lot, and she was one of those women after the Second World War who had to rebuild the cities in Germany. And of course, there was a lot to do, and she had 3 children, and she was a busy woman, of course. And she always used to say to me, I will say it in Germany and then translate it, was du heute kannst besorgen, verschiebe dich auf morgen. What you can do today, you won't schedule for tomorrow. You will do it today.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of like, okay, everything that's in my mind, I have to do it today. And that really was exhausting, and it was good to see the cause. I never came into the idea to find the cause a moment by myself, but It's good to
Yeah.
honor that. And I'm still relearning to do things, wasting my time in the best way.
Yeah. We have to relearn because society reinforces, as you just said, when you get the compliments of how much you did. And I don't think that I realized that to the extent until I left my corporate job and I was in business for myself. And I remember one of my old colleagues giving me a call, and they would call me every once in a while to kind of see what I was working on and what was going on. And they would always ask, "So what's on your schedule today? What are you doing today? Who are you?" And I was like, "Oh, you first of all, there's like a comparison going on. Like you're comparing your calendar to my calendar." And you're also deciding whether or not I'm successful because you're taking the old paradigm of what we had in the old company, which would have been your worth as an executive is, well, I have 2 sheets of calls to roll. So I've got 50 people I have to call back because 50 people called me. I've got to call those people back. And guess what? My schedule is booked from breakfast all the way to dinner. That's how you know that I'm successful because I have all these meetings and I have all these things that I have to do and all these people that want to talk to me.
That is true.
Half of them I don't want to talk to, or half of them is just a waste of time.
And I think that economy and corporate systems also have to relearn, because it could be in a good way so much more creative and solution orientated if there would be more space during work time for nature and rest and doing slow things, so ideas can come up.
Yeah,
it's just like, and I quit my corporate job 3 years ago. I've always been a mom and working, and it's always been kind of like trying to do it on every set right. And I'm still learning the patterns of to-do lists that are too long, of scheduling too many things into a day.
Yeah.
Of thinking about, I will relax on weekend, Saturday, which is just the idea is just nonsense. It took me a year, and my husband said, "Well, you're running more than you did before. Didn't you want to you told me that you want to relax. That's why you quit. So where's the relaxation?"
Yeah, it's true. It's true. If we can just reframe and say, let me create the rest period as the centrality of my day, and then allow myself to understand, how does my natural flow go, right? It's like my creative time is in the morning, right? So that's where I want to be able to write. That's where I want to be able to create. If I know that I have space in the afternoon, I can create that space for rest. And then if I know that once the sun starts to move to a certain position in the sky and my energy is waning, then I know I'm not going to schedule work for a time after that, right? And so maybe your whole workday shifts, and no longer is it the 9 to 5, right? And it just allows for more time for you to transition with the natural cycle of the day, to be able to take 15-minute breaks to rest and relax. And just, I really feel like it's all about permission. It's really about giving yourself permission, because we shouldn't just be resting on a Saturday for a few hours, because that never happens. You think you're going to rest, and then there's all the things that need to happen. So we need to schedule time for intentional rest. We need to make rest a priority. And if we do that, we actually become much more productive because we become more clear and we problem solve much easier because the mind is clear, the mind is sharp, the mind sees different ways that to solve things that have not been mined from the past experiences. And it really is, and I believe this is true, that rest is a space of innovation and creativity. It gives us access to things, as we said before, that have been concealed prior. This is why these epiphanies and downloads come in after and sometimes during practice.
Yes.
Because the mind is shut off, right?
Yes, and
for a little bit.
With it being shut off, all the limitations are gone and all the conditioning, which kind of takes away a lot of creativity, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
So wonderful advice. Schedule the rest. Is there the end? So I would love to ask you, is there any other recommendations that you would like to share, or maybe a book that is besides your own, which I truly recommend, and I hope it will be translated into German? Are there any plans?
I hope so. So it's right now being translated into Spanish. And I think what has to happen, and I'm not sure if this is completely accurate, but I think that there are German publishers that may be partners with Penguin Random House or Shambhala, and they request, to translate. So hopefully there's a German publisher there that is interested in bringing rest to Germany, and maybe someone can narrate it in German as well for the audiobook. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed because I do have a lot of students in Germany, and I know they would appreciate being able to listen to the book in German or read it in German.
Of course, I would love to. I'm sitting here with my dictionary because, well, English comes and goes. But I have to, before you share recommendation, I want to point out that with the book, if someone likes to read in English, there comes a Yoga Nidra practice on SoundCloud to practice with you, which I really enjoy in the lunch break time in the afternoon, practicing a lot with you.
Oh, wonderful.
And that's really a gift to be able to not read. There's a place we might not be able to talk about it today, but there's a place where you say that to read ourselves through practice can be wonderful. I really enjoy to lay back and relax and let someone else do the work.
Yeah, so self-guiding is wonderful. And I think when you deepen your practice to do a mixture of self-guiding and listening. And so when you buy the book, Radiant Rest, whether it's the audiobook or the physical book, on page 8, there's a link. And that link gives you all the downloadable audio recordings. So you can immediately, upon buying the book, just lay down and listen to the practices. And as far as other books go, if you're interested in Yoga Nidra, I love the book by Kamini Desai, which is called The Art of Transformational Sleep. I believe Yoga Nidra, The Art of Transformational Sleep, is a beautiful book. There's a book coming, I think it's coming in a few months, from Uma Dinsmore-Tuli, which is an encyclopedia of Yoga Nidra. So it will be an encyclopedia of all the different traditions of Yoga Nidra, the history of Yoga Nidra. It should be, I'm really excited for this book. Any of the teachings of Sri Aurobindo, I would recommend. The Life Divine is a beautiful work. as is Savitri. And so this is something that if you decide to read those, I kind of love to read them before I go to sleep, right? Because I think the moments before we sleep, what we ingest before we go to sleep really informs our dream and sleep state. And so it's a beautiful way to bring in the sacred just before you go to sleep, just by reading a verse or two verses of the poetry there. So those would be the things that I would recommend. And if you're interested in learning how to teach Yoga Nidra, I do train teachers teach, and you can always reach me through my website if you have any questions.
I will put the link into the show notes, and I will try to find those books and put them on the blog so everybody can see and access.
Yeah, that would be great.
We'll try to. I don't know if I spelled it all right, but I might come back for questions.
I can also send you an email too, so you make sure you have them. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for your beautiful work, for listening to that calling at me. And I really appreciate it. And people, if you have questions, just reach out to Tracee on her homepage. The link is in the show notes, and everything else is on the blog. And happy to read this together.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the offer for this collaboration and the invitation. It's been absolutely divine. So thank you so much, Silja.
Thank you, Tracee. Hey und pst, es gibt einen neuen Podcast von mir, der ursprünglich auf einer von mir geschaffenen Kursplattform nur zur Verfügung gestellt wurde. Er heißt Zurück zur Natur und ich beschreibe darin, wie ich ätherische Öle und Supplements nutze und was ich den Leuten, die das mit mir entdecken, rate. Wenn du also Lust hast, auf diesem Weg auch mir ein bisschen zuzuhören, dann findest du Zurück zur Natur überall da, wo du auch diesen Podcast findest. Viel Spaß beim Zuhören.